Brody Malone won his third title in dominating fashion. The roster is set for the Olympic trials, and of course, there was some judging drama. For those new here, I'm Kensley, the host of Neutral Deductions, a podcast all about men's gymnastics. Today, I'm joined by former Nebraska gymnast and multimedia contributor Gabe Sanchez, who has been on site covering the meet for us this past weekend. This is episode 34, where we are going to focus on the U.S. National Gymnastics Championships.
This is the Neutral Deductions podcast, men's gymnastic news, coverage, and analysis.
Hi, Gabe. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Kensley. Great to be joining you again on the podcast.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for covering it live. So for those of you who didn't know, I was actually singing at a wedding on Saturday for a good friend of mine. So I'm super thankful that Gabe was willing and able to go to the National Gymnastics Championships, and he got some amazing content for us. If you haven't checked it out, you should definitely go to our YouTube channel at Neutral Deductions and look at all of the interviews that he was able to capture this past weekend. So Gabe, what stood out to you among those interviews this past weekend?
It was great to see how excited the athletes were after the competition. You know, they've been working really hard all year long to put together their routines. And it was really great that they were so pleased about their performances.
Yeah, and I think it definitely showed. After night one, things were looking a little rough for everyone except for Brody Malone. So for those of you who didn't know, Brody was sitting in first place, followed by Fred, who started the competition a little bit rough. I think at the final rotation, he ended up jumping from 7th place to 2nd place at the end of the competition. So I was a little precarious for him at the beginning. Donnell was in 3rd, Colt Walker was in 4th, Coy Young was in 5th, and then Yul Moldauer was all the way down in 9th, and Asher was in 10th. And we'll get into why they were down so low a little bit later. But I'm curious, were you able to talk with high performance director Brett McClure at all? And did he have anything to say about what he saw in night one?
I did. So I talked with Brett after day one, and here's what his thoughts were.
There were a lot of fantastic routines and a lot of mistakes and everything in between. So it was kind of a roller coaster of emotions. I hope the nerves have settled a bit and these guys can let it fly on day 2 and basically just perform.
It was so great to hear from him. Did he have anything to say about what he was looking for or what he was expecting from the athletes on night 2 of competition?
Yeah, he mentioned that.
I expect him to be a little bit more comfortable. So my hope is fewer mistakes and more stuck landings.
So heading into night 2 of competition, we had some interesting surprises meet us ahead of time. So the media got information that Curran Phillips had withdrawn from the competition due to a hand injury and that he would be petitioning to Olympic trials. And my understanding is that his hand injury was, of course, bothersome, but it was more that he was trying to protect his hand the closer they are planning to get to Paris. And so that he just needed to rest for this point and he'll be fine and ready to go for Olympic trials. So I was watching from the broadcast after the fact because, as I mentioned, I was singing at a wedding. And one of the interesting things that was just sort of in the backstory, aside from Curran's injury, was former Stanford football player Andrew Luck was in the audience. So I don't know if they mentioned him in the arena or if you saw anything about this. Did you see it, Gabe?
No, I'm really interested. Tell me more about this.
Yeah, so Andrew Luck, of course, was an incredible quarterback for Stanford and then went on to be successful in the NFL. And he ended up marrying a gymnast who competed internationally. And he and his wife, Nicole, they have just dedicated their lives basically to help Stanford gymnasts be successful at the Olympics. So if I understood correctly from the broadcast, they're helping some of the athletes out with housing. They've been going to the farmers market and bringing them fresh food and making sure that they have fresh options for them to eat every week. And I just thought, like, what a cool story. It was really cool for me to see. And you think of football guys as like being like these big jocks. And it was nice to see their support for the athletes there.
That's such a great story. I remember my time at Nebraska. You really do make a community with the other student athletes there. So it's great to know that there's a strong community support network at Stanford.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, Stanford had the largest contingent of any team or club there. And it actually ended up making the rotations a little bit longer than I think people would have wanted, because some of the rotations had 3 athletes in them, and then you had Stanford with their monster list, and everyone was just waiting for them to get done competing. But of course, the former Stanford gymnast who is now competing at Evo, who was sort of topping those standings, Brody Malone, two-time world or two-time national champion. He came back, of course, from that horrific injury. And what we found out at this competition was that he has to use 2 different braces to compete. And he has to be extra warm for floor and vault. So I was listening back to the interviews, and he has this giant brace that he has to put on specifically for floor and vault. And he said it was a giant pain in the butt, and he doesn't like changing them. And it's like the worst part of the competition for him.
That's really funny. But it just shows that he's not in pain. He's able to compete on it. He just needs to take the proper medical precautions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, a lot of people didn't expect Brody to do so well and to be so dominant in the competition.
I will say there is one person who thought he was going to do well, which was you. Called it out on the last podcast.
That's true. I was going to say that people should have listened to the preview podcast, because I had known at the Olympic team camp what his start value was going to be on 4 events. And then I texted his coach, Psych Caesar, because Psych and I went to Michigan together. And I had just said, hey, like, what is his plan for floor and vault? Because originally I had thought, okay, he's probably just going to do a Souk full, and like maybe he's going to have like a 4.5, maybe 5.0 D score on floor, just so that they could put him in if something happened in qualifications, just so he wouldn't be a liability to the team. And then I heard back from Psych, and he said, oh, he's doing a cos 1.5 on vault, and he's doing a 5.7 D score on floor. And I was like, he's going to win the whole thing. So I was just sure at that point, when I knew what his D score was going to be, that he was back and fully back, and that he was going to win by a good margin. And that's exactly what happened. He ended up winning the meet by just over 2 points.
He did. So let's break it down. Night 1, he got an 85.95. And then on night 2, somehow did even better, an 86.35. That was the highest all-around score we saw the entire weekend. What events stood out on night 2 for you?
I mean, you have to say his high bar routine. I mean, it's a 6.7 D score. It's one of the highest in the world. He wasn't quite as sharp as he was on night 1, but it's still just such a fantastic apparatus for him. I think the other piece of that I was really interested in was his ring score. He ended up scoring a 14.85, I believe, which is like, that's getting into potential event final territory. And I think it just shows that while you would never wish an injury on anyone, there were benefits that have come out of him having that injury, because for so long he could only work on his ring strength. And it's something that we saw with Sam Mikulik too, who's one of his coaches at Evo, and again, another Michigan athlete. When Sam had his Achilles issues, he talked about being on rings and pommel horse being the only things he could do, and those injuries giving him that time to improve upon those events.
So comparing his difficulty values from 2022 to now, he's increased his difficulty score on high bar and on rings by 0.4 each. So that's really impressive that he had a major injury and still was able to upgrade that much on those 2 events.
It's just really impressive what he's been able to do over these last 15 months or so.
While Brody put together 2 really good days of all-around, on his final routine, pommel horse, he did have some form issues, and it looked like he was just a little bit tired.
Yeah, but right on his heels really was Fred Richard, who ended up coming in 2nd place overall. And Fred ended up improving every single one of his events except for high bar, which he got the exact same score from night 1 to night 2. And as I was listening to the interviews with him, he said that he is so hungry. He hates losing. Like, he's happy for Brody, but he is going back in that gym. And he said, everyone better watch out at Olympic trials.
It is funny. Fred puts on a game face. When he's on the competition floor, you know he is there to compete.
Yeah, absolutely. So afterwards, the interviewers had asked him what he was most proud of, and he said he was most proud of his floor routine on day 2. He said he had a few little hops here and there, but overall, he was really happy with how clean it was and felt like the score reflected what he had put in the work. And he was overall just really positive about the US's chances in Paris, and he is hungry to come away and win a medal and be a part of that team.
For sure. I do want to say that floor was a highlight on day 2. He got a 14.9 with a 6.0 difficulty score. It was a very, very nice routine.
Yeah, and he wasn't the only gymnast who really had a massive improvement from day 1 to day 2. Koi Young also had a big improvement overall. I think close to 2.5 points from day 1. He scored an 83.4. To day 2, he scored an 86.15. And I did want to ask you about this. So on the broadcast, there was a question posed to both Brody and Koi, and they said, your score at the national championship would have scored higher than Daiki Hashimoto at the world championships. And they were like, oh, wow, that's so cool. And like, part of me is like, yes, that is like such a cool stat to say, but also I was like, maybe we need to be comparing domestic scoring to domestic scoring. And like, do you know that he got like an 88 at domestic scoring? I don't know. What is your opinion about that?
It's one of those things that it's probably not for the athletes' benefit. It's for the fans watching. It's to get people excited about turning on their TVs and watching gymnastics in Paris. So I don't think the athletes will really take it wholeheartedly, especially Koi. Koi's an athlete who he is running the numbers back home in Stanford. He is looking at what situations he'll fit on a team, and he's also looking at what numbers he needs to medal. So I don't think it's really affecting Koi, but it is just a fun stat to know.
For sure. I think one athlete that was most surprising for me was Asher. I say most surprising in some way, and in other ways, I'm really not surprised. I have felt for a while that since 2022, there's sort of been maybe, I hate to say like a steady decline in his gymnastics, but he hasn't seemed quite as prepared, I guess, as I saw him at the 2022 World Championships. And he seemed really sluggish here. Just seemed like he would start every apparatus quite good and then really struggled with stamina and dismounts. I'm chalking it up to stamina, but I was curious what your thoughts were just being there and watching him in person.
Well, let's give some context. Remember, Asher has been one of the biggest beneficiaries of the US's bonus system. Asher competes some very hard routines. So in the past 2 cycles, his all-around score at nationals has been bumped up because of this. I remember you saying if the bonus system was not in place, he would have not been national champion last year. So adding into the fact that there's no bonus system this year, it's all relying on just D&E score. You kind of get a clearer picture. And the clearer picture is that without a execution score, Asher's not as competitive as he was last year.
Yeah, I do think he is maybe still coming off the injury, so I don't want to like rule him out just quite yet. I know he was dealing with a sore back at the NCAA championships. That's why he only competed a few events, and he looked great on the events that he was competing there. But competing a couple events versus competing all around is a completely different story. So I think that Asher has a lot of strengths that would really benefit the people who seem to be locks for the team, having, a good still rings routine, having that 6-0 vault if he can put it to his feet and not have that huge lunge forward. So I definitely still think he's in the conversation. I just think I think one of the broadcasters said if you had told Asher after day 1 he would be done in 10th place, he would have never believed you. And I think that that's true for most people. So it'll be really interesting to see if he can turn it around in a couple weeks and be ready for Olympic trials.
I will say, compared to the other athletes who kind of use that first day to gain momentum, learn on their mistakes, and improve, Asher's score just didn't. They did improve in the all around, but not by much. He was still getting E scores in the sevens and the low eights. So he's really, really, really going to have to turn that around and step up if he wants to make a case for himself to make the Olympic team.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I want to touch on a couple other pivotal moments here. So, Paul Judah on floor, day one, stellar routine, gorgeous routine. Day two, ran out of gas a little bit, had a couple lunges here and there on some of his routines, which ended up meaning that his teammate Fred Richard came away with the win on floor. Yul Moldauer smashed day two. He moved from ninth to fourth. I think it was the biggest jump aside from maybe Tate Costa, which we'll get to in a little bit. He had almost a 3.5 point increase in just total score overall. His day two vault, he stuck the vault versus day one, he fell. And he ended up falling because he earlier on high bar, he had done his Fedorchenko dismount, which is the triple double, and he had landed a little wonky. He said his hip was a little bit sore and maybe in some pain.
Honestly, lifting my leg kind of hurt, running and flares. I was not going to not do all around. I wanted to show that no matter what happens, I can put my head down and grind.
And so to see him come out night two and be able to give it his all in the Yule that we're used to seeing, I think bodes really well for him for this Olympic team selection.
I also want to bring up his parallel bars. He won parallel bars at this meet. He got a 15.4 on both days. He's incredibly consistent at this. I talked to him in the mix zone afterwards, and if he makes the Olympic team, he is going for a P-Bars medal. He brought up his experience in Germany at the Bundesliga. He was able to compete weekend after weekend with the current world champion.
Lucas Dowser.
Yes, he was able to compete alongside Lucas Dowser, and it had a big impact on him.
Yeah, Lucas is the king of the Makuts, and mainly I feel that no one should be able to do Makuts except for him because everyone else has these ridiculously long pauses. Although I will say Curran Phillips is getting much better at his, and they are definitely quite good, but no one does it like Lucas. And so I'm really glad to hear that Yule felt like he benefited from his time in Germany. I do want to touch on Steven Nedorosik, who ended up winning pommel horse. So day one, he had a fantastic routine. I think he got a 16.4, correct me if I'm wrong, and had a 6.4 difficulty score. And then on day two, he had a 5.7. And so I didn't actually see what happened. I was just looking at the results and I was like, why in the world did he get a 5.7? Like, it wouldn't be a fall. His execution score was too high. And thankfully, his coach, Psych Caesar, had put out a Twitter thread or an X thread about it. And he said, pommel horse rules are rough, even though he didn't fall off on the bazoogo. So for the listeners who are new to men's gymnastics skills, a bazoogo is the turn on one hand backwards. So a sewn goes forward, bazoogo for backwards. That's the skill he made a mistake on. So while he didn't fall off on the bazoogo, it's not credited unless two hands come back to front support on both pommels. In addition, Steve did a D flop versus an E flop and did not do the Russians on the leather, so counted 2 A skills for 5.7, and which was the correct D score. And Psych also said when he coached at Stanford, Ian Gunther sometimes made the same mistake on bazoogo, so they submitted it as a new element 3 years ago, and the FIG MTC, the men's technical committee, evaluated it as no value and updated the sewn/bazoogo performance criteria to be credited only when completed on 2 pommels. What a fantastic insight.
I love that story. That is terrific, and hats off to Psych for trying to get away with it. That is wonderful.
Yeah, that's what's part of what sports are about, are testing the rules and seeing what you can get away with. And we're going to get to a story that happened just in this meet about getting away with working the rules just a bit later.
Neutral Deductions recently launched this year and is entirely funded by listener contributions. If you'd like to support the show and help promote men's gymnastics, kindly consider making a donation through the PayPal link provided in the show notes. All donations are greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Kensley, did you have any other favorite routines of the night?
Yeah, there were a couple other routines that I really enjoyed. I thought Shane Wiskus really showed out on parallel bars. He was exceptional there. Um, Shane has been so impressive to me in general. I've talked about this a couple of times, but last year when he pulled out of the Pan Am Games, he really thought he would be done with gymnastics. And so when I was putting together my Olympic preview earlier this year, I completely left him off because I really did not think he was going to be back to gymnastics. Not that he didn't have the skill or the capability, but I really didn't think he was coming back based on the conversations I had had with him. And he has come back and he's looked phenomenal. So that was really nice to see. Also, Paul Judah's vault, can we just take a minute for that? He only got 5/10 deduction on his vault. He has basically no pre-flight deduction. I mean, maybe you could take a 10th. His feet barely spread apart as they leave the board. Just a tiny hop on the landing. Just one of my favorite pieces of gymnastics to see, to be completely honest.
It is great. I do enjoy that vault a lot.
Moving on to some other issues or aspects of the competition, I want to touch lightly on some of the judging issues that were perceived to happen in the competition. So I want to first start off with high bar. In my personal opinion, I felt like high bar was too harsh on the athletes. One of the biggest examples I would say was Yul Moldauer's score, specifically on day one. He's much improved there. He used to really struggle finishing Takimoto skills in handstands. He would maybe sometimes lack a little bit of amplitude on his release moves, and I just really feel like he's cleaned it up. He used to have a Ribalco in there that I honestly thought mainly should have gotten no credit. It usually finished so late. He took that skill out. He's reworked his routine. And I just didn't feel like it was rewarded as well as I felt it should be. But that being said, the D1 on high bar is Sho Nakamori, who is one of the judges that I respect the absolute most in this country. And additionally, American Butch Zunich is the high bar lead on the FIG Men's Technical Committee, and he usually serves on the supervisory committee for the entire men's program at these national meets. And so there may have been some direct instructions from Butch to the men's panel on how the FIG is planning on having high bar judged at the Olympic Games. And so that may be what have played into it. But I was a little bit shocked at how tight the judging was there.
I will say about the high bar judging is that internationally, high bar is the lowest scoring event. So we should not expect to see high bar scores get as high as maybe we'll see pommel horse and P-bar scores. With that said, I agree with you. I do think the high bar scores were a little low in this competition.
Now, high bar wasn't the only place of controversy. There was also some controversy going on with vault judging. So, Gabe, can you touch lightly on what was happening there?
Did feel like there was something off with the vault judging. One of the more obvious examples of this was Stanford's Riley Luce, who normally competes handspring Randy, which is 2.5 twist, competed a Rudy 1.5 twist on day 2. We see the score get flashed in the stadium, and he got credit for the 2.5 twist. This feels like a very obvious error in the judge's part that should not have been made. I will say that the score was eventually changed, but that felt like a very obvious miss that shouldn't happen in the national championships. Another example that a lot of people noticed was the evaluation of the Riseng Guang vaults. So that's a double back vault with a full twist. The two athletes that we have here competing that are Stanford's Asher Hong and Donnell Winberg. Asher Hong competed a pretty similar vault day 2 that he did when he competed at Worlds in 2022. The thing was, the score that he got at Worlds was about 4/10 higher than he did at this competition. And that's not to include that he stepped out of bounds when he competed at Worlds. A lot of the coaches on the national team kind of frustrated, and we're receiving reports that they have asked the entire panel to be replaced for trials.
Yeah, I can certainly confirm that that's true, that several coaches have asked for the entire vault panel to be replaced for Olympic trials. I agree that I think the vault judging was significantly different than we saw at the World Championships last year and at other international events, but I want to be extremely clear about what has happened. So obviously, there's a lot of feelings associated with these scores because they're going to have a direct impact on the Olympic selection, assuming that the men's Olympic selection doesn't end up going to selection committee and the team ends up being auto-selected. And while I certainly disagree with the vault judging here at the national championship, they did not give Donnell nor Asher an impossible score. And I think that that's a really important takeaway. So this is not a Marian Dragulescu, Kyle Schufelt situation at the 2004 Olympics where Dragulescu fell and they gave him a literal impossible score. So if an impossible score is given, that can be the right for immediate eviction from the competition and has happened at world competitions before. This was incredibly strict scoring that seemingly was focused only on the 260 vaults. That being said, you can justify all the deductions that were taken. So I think that that's a really important key takeaway. Now, there are huge differences, as we mentioned, between the judging panels at this U.S. championship and then what has happened at the World Championships in the past during this Olympic cycle. And I want to sort of explain potentially some of the differences that play into that. So in the US, judges are assigned at the beginning of the year. So sometimes they're even assigned as early as a full Olympic cycle. And so the judging panels end up judging together continuously throughout the year. They judge at Winter Cup and at NCAAs and at national championships and although NCAAs is sometimes a little different, and then at Olympic trials. So at least 3 times a year, they're judging together. They're practicing. They know how each other judge inside and out. So they can often feel really confident in the scores that they are given. At a big event like a World Championships and an Olympics, the difficulty judges are assigned well in advance, but the E-score judges aren't picked until like 24 hours before the event and sometimes even as late as the morning of. And so for these judging panels, they are being judged against the judging evaluation program. So they're sort of trying to beat the system, not necessarily trying to provide the most accurate scores. And it's a slight differentiation, but it's an important one. And so a FIG brevet judge who runs Flip Decisions ended up talking about this on X. And I thought her thread was really insightful. And so I want to read it to you now. She said, perhaps the problem isn't the inconsistency of judges, but the inconsistency of the circumstances under which the judges are judging. Judging vault with only one live viewing is exceptionally difficult. Many have advocated for decades that judges should be permitted a second videotaped viewing on vault, ideally from a different viewing perspective. The deductions that were taken for Asher and Dawn at the U.S. Championships were there. Leg separations and bend in all phases, off-axis entry, early tuck, no preparation landing for Asher, low chest position and deep landing, large step, and foot form. I would argue that the scores given at the U.S. Championships were more accurate than those given at Worlds. This is where judging circumstances come into play. Very different panel dynamics between a panel at the World Championships and a panel at the U.S. Championships. The e-jury panels at Worlds are drawn just a few hours or at best a day before the competition, leaving little time for specific apparatus preparation. Additionally, many FIG competitions, e-jurors are restricted from viewing podium training. They are not allowed to view their apparatus from the seating perspective that they will have during the competition, right? That's huge, right? to not be able to see in the arena where you're going to be judging from. It's like the judges don't get podium training, which feels a little bit wrong, to be completely honest. But there's even more. So at a world championships or an Olympic games, judging panels are level with the apparatus, meaning that they're not looking up into the lights. Whereas at this U.S. championship, while it was better, the U.S. Judges were raised a little bit on every event except, I believe, floor. They still were looking up into the light. They weren't even with the apparatus. And so, like, let's take Riley's vault, for instance. It is possible that the judges were looking up into the lights and honestly couldn't see the number of twists. And they knew that he usually did a 5-6 and just assumed, and then maybe called for video review, right? That's something that could happen in that scenario. And is certainly a scenario that I've heard from other judges that happen, that if they look up into the lights, they truly can't count the twists there and need to view things afterwards. So I think that because of all of this uproar, that the judges are likely going to be given a talking to and probably some clarity on judging standards for vault before Olympic trials. But I'll be pretty surprised if the entire panel or even anyone on the panel is replaced, to be completely honest, but we'll see what ends up happening. A final word on the topic. I with the men's program committee ending up going towards automatic selection with numbers driven data. I've been saying this since the selection criteria came out, that if you're going to write rules that auto select a team, you better make sure that you have the best judges on the floor. And I'll reiterate that the highest ranked judges are not on the floor. There are higher rated judges at home. There are judges with more experience at home. And the vault panel specifically has 2 category 4 judges for sure. Meanwhile, I know for a fact that there are category 2 and 3 judges at home from this country. There are category 1 judges from other countries who live in the U.S. who would be available. So all that to say, I hope that we do see the most accurate judging heading into Olympic trials and that the correct team will be selected.
Neutral Deductions is your exclusive gymnastics news platform focused entirely on men's gymnastics. To show your support, please subscribe to Neutral Deductions' YouTube channel and follow us on Instagram.
On to happier news. Gabe, can you tell me a little bit about the full results from this competition?
Absolutely. So these are 2-day combined scores. In first place, we have Brody Malone, who got a combined total of 172.3. That was followed up by Fred Richard, who got a 170.25. In third place was Stanford's Coy Young with a 169.55. I was actually lucky enough to talk to Coy after the competition, and here's how he described his results after night 2.
Yeah, it feels great. I mean, I knew that I was capable of that 15 day one, and that 15 would have put me in a great spot for the all around.
Yeah.
So in my mind, I was thinking I just got to come back and put my score in to really show up in the team scenarios. For me personally, I know I can hit any of these routines on any day, but going back to back to back through all 6, a full competition, it's really tough, and it's really hard to build that endurance and that confidence. And I'm glad that I could show that I could do it today.
Yeah, I think for me, obviously Brody was the exact, it was the winner overall, but I think one of the things that he can be most proud of is how consistent he was, because a lot of the athletes weren't very consistent here. He was just about 4/10 apart in his performance from day 1 to day 2. The only athletes who were more consistent were Donnell, who got exactly the same score in 83.5 both days, which is incredible. And then Colt Walker had an 83.5 one day and an 83.3. Also incredibly consistent.
Can I just give hats off to Donnell? Because when he was going through his very first Olympic trials in 2016, the complaint that everyone had about Donnell was his inconsistency. So it is just amazing to see him come this far and having such consistent performances.
Oh, I agree. And for him to add back that Risei Guang vault after such a long time, I just really impressed with him overall this competition.
So continuing with the all-around order, in fourth place you have Yule, who got a 168.2, improving again almost 3 points, more than 3 points from his night one performance. And then in fifth place was Shane Wiskus with a 168.2.
Okay, so I have to tell you possibly my favorite moment from the media files was hearing Brody Malone talk about winning the belt buckle. I think he was more excited about winning the belt buckle than he was about winning his third all-around title. He said he had won belt buckles in the rodeos that he had done, but never in gymnastics. He said he was pretty sure he was the only gymnast who would have worn the belt buckle he had won. I'm not sure that's totally true. I think Yule might actually have won it. I feel like Yule always has fancy belts. But he told his fiance that he might wear the belt buckle to their wedding, which, like, I wish I could be a fly on the wall to hear that conversation.
I love that. I agree. I think Yule would have worn a belt buckle because he did not take his cowboy hat off after the meet was over. He was rocking that thing. Also, some behind the scenes details was I asked USA Gymnastics if before they handed out the awards, would I be able to photograph this belt buckle because it was really cool. And they said, absolutely not. You will see it when it comes out and awarded to the winner. So they were keeping that thing locked down.
Oh my goodness, that is really funny. Oh my goodness. Well, we did have 6 different event winners that I want to touch on. So Frederick Richard won the floor title. Steven Underosic came away with the pommel horse title. Alex Diab won still rings. Donnell Wittenberg won vault. That's with the 2 vault average. Yule Moldauer won parallel bars. And Brody Malone won high bar. So pretty impressive that Evo came away with 3 of the event titles as well as the all-around winner as well.
Also wanted to talk about the awards. Now, these awards are voted on by the coaches and the athletes before the competition, and they're announced afterwards. So the 3 awards that they were giving out is Sports Person of the Year, and that went to former Michigan gymnast Cameron Buck. Athlete of the Year went to Stanford gymnast Corey Young, and Coach of the Year went to Stanford coach Tom Galimi.
Yeah, I really, really well deserved, I think. Let's move into how the national team was selected. So the first 5 people added to the senior national team were just top 5 in the all-around, so this was a no-brainer. Brody, Fred, Coy, Yule, and Shane. And then the next people added to the senior national team were by the men's 10-point program. So this is where each gymnast is given a number from 11 down to 1 based on how well they place in each event. And then it's added together at the end of the competition. And so the top 5 scorers in that point program minus the top 5 all-arounders were Colt Walker, Paul Judah, Asher Hong, Cameron Bach, and Donnell Wittenberg. And then we got to the discretionary and petition. So the discretionary selection went to Fuzzy Bennis, who was the next all-arounder, not already in that group of athletes. Jeremy Bischoff was there. Kern Phillips petitioned because he didn't finish the competition and his petition was accepted. Alex Diab, who won still rings. Patty Hoops, who came in second on pommel horse, and Steven Edorosico as well. So if you listen to our preview episode, I said that I thought 2 of the pommel horse specialists between Steven Edorosic, Patty Hoops, and Brandon Dang would be accepted, and that is exactly how they ended up choosing a discretionary petition. So Brandon Dang wasn't put onto the senior national team. And then there were spots awarded for the senior development team. And the senior development team is for athletes who are age 18 to 20 who met the 32 D score requirement. And so this was Josh Carnes, Kieran Mandava, Kai Umira, and Tate Costa. So again, a little bit of controversy in my opinion here. I wasn't fully happy with the selection. They had room to add one more athlete, but they didn't. And so I'm a little bit annoyed that Landon Blixt wasn't selected. So Landon was on the senior development team prior to this competition, and he was the only one of these athletes to break 80 either day. So his day 2 score would have been within the top 25 at last year's World Championships. And I feel like the selection committee made a bad decision by prioritizing an athlete who put themselves in a potentially dangerous and precarious position over someone who actually came in prepared. And we're going to get into the weeds on this one. So Tate Costa, he will be famous for this forever, ended up adding around 4 points in difficulty from the NCAA championships to the national championships to get his D score up to a 32. So he really worked the system, and here's him saying in his own words how he feels about making the senior development team.
Set out a goal with my coach of getting the difficulty score, and was happy to succeed on day one with it, and then moved on. It was a little bit embarrassing, and it was definitely harder. We just kind of followed the rules of like what it was needed to make the senior development team. So from NCAA's, we added 18 skills to my routine, and then we took about half of them out for day 2, so I could try to perform a little better. Because once I got the score, I just needed to try to do better the day next day.
So after I talked to Tate, I talked to high performance director Brett McClure and wanted to know what his thoughts were on Tate's performance. And this is what he had to say.
My hat's off to him, man. Like, he had 4 weeks to put 4 points of difficulty in, and to be able to do that shows that you're somebody that we want to develop, right? Because that spot is for a year, and he has a year to clean up that execution and maintain his development spot the next year as well. If he keeps that, difficulty up there, there's going to have to be an evaluation process, and luckily with the development team, we have the year to figure it out for the next year. So we'll have a bunch of data, come Winter Cup, we'll start to see kind of where that threshold is, but we know for sure we want to keep D score a main part of the development team.
I'm a little surprised he was so positive about this. I don't think that was the result I expected, and maybe shame on me for not having expected Brett to be so excited about that. I don't blame Tate and his coaches for working the system. I mean, working the system is certainly part of sport. I think back to women's gymnastics at the 2010 World Championship floor final when Lauren Mitchell of Australia won, because she had put a jump at the end of every single one of her tumbling passes to be able to control the landing. So she effectively got rid of landing deductions by working the code of points. And I think Gabe and I are both really interested in Formula One, and a lot of Formula One is what rules can we get around and what can we read between the lines and do. And so it was certainly smart of his coaches to find a way to put him on national team. I don't know if I was high performance director that I would think it was such a great idea, especially considering that he got a 5 execution score on every single event. But this has certainly brought Tate to Kohei Uchimura status, because there is certainly going to be a rule made about him, just like there was for Kohei when he missed his dismount at the 2012 Olympic Games. That being said, I think the system is probably going to see some changes. I would certainly like it to see some changes. So just like the U.S. men's program has utilized the bonus system in an effective way, I would like them to potentially have a similar system with the senior development team. So something this could look like would be at the first year of the Olympic cycle, yes, everyone's required to have a 32D, but you must have a minimum of a 7.0 E-score. 7.0 E-score is really low, but it's doable. It's not 5s. And then the next year, the second year, would be 32D score and 7.5 E-score. Third year, 32D score and 7.75 E-score. And then finally, in the Olympic year, 32D score and 8.0 execution score, which would be an 80. And I feel like for a gymnast age 18 to 20 to get them up to that 80 standard before really becoming a great contender for that next Olympic team is a really good spot to be in.
What I want to add is it seems like Brett McClure is very focused on high D scores. He's said time and time again that he believes his success is because he is pushing athletes to get high D scores. And one more tidbit, Lily brought up in her conference about how proud she was that the D score had been implemented and the US has seen success because of it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the bonus system has certainly seen success. And I think a lot of people were really down on it in the beginning. And I was like, they're trying something. Like, they haven't been trying anything for years. Like, just let them see if it will work. And it did work. And, I think it was the brainchild of more than just Brett. I think that there were other people at the helm helping create that. And I certainly understand the reason for the bonus system, but the bonus system was to eradicate, like, if an athlete had a fall, so right, expecting athletes to have D scores maybe in like the sevens, or if they would have normally had like a 9, then they're getting an 8 because they fell on a casino and the casino is too hard for them, but they're not going to get punished for it for this. But the whole point of the bonus D score system was for it to be eradicated by the Olympic year. And it just seems very against the spirit of what they're trying to accomplish to have, in the year that they got rid of the bonus system, that they're super excited about an athlete doing a 32 D score with a 5.0 execution score.
It's going to be really interesting to see what they do next year.
Right. And maybe that's the point. Like, maybe that's just gearing up the athletes that they think are going to be important for the next Olympic cycle. But it just, there's something about that doesn't, well, I think it's hilarious and like that they found a way to work the system. Don't get me wrong. I don't think getting 5.0 E scores is the way that we want to go about doing that.
So I want to know, after this competition, who's stock up and who is stock down for you?
Oh, for me, Yule 100% stock up. I was really worried about him after day one sitting in ninth. I think Shane Wiskus is also stock up. And I, no athlete that has worked this hard wants to say like, oh, they're in the perfect place for an alternate position. But I kind of feel like that's where he is right now, is he is in that perfect place to be an alternate for this Olympic Games. Whereas I don't necessarily know that he was fully in that conversation before.
I think Shane might be a little bit a victim of the rules change too. I think he made really good sense in 2021 when it was a 4-person team, but now with a 5-person team where you can get some people who specialize in more events, I think it takes his value as a all-arounder down a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with you, but he's doing fantastic work here, and I'll be interested to continue and follow his work at the Olympic trials. I think for me, the stock down is Asher. Unfortunately, he's an athlete I've been following and covering for a really long time, and I don't think he's out of the conversation in any way, shape, or form. But based on the team that's sort of forming, which we'll talk about in just a moment, he really needs that strong 6.0 vault. Like, he needs to nail those vaults. He really needs to have super strong performances on still rings, and then of course anything else he can add. But I think those 2 events mainly.
I also want to say I think they're stock down for a ring specialist. I think because Brody Malone has improved so much, getting a 14.8, it really eliminates the need to have a one event gymnast on that event.
Yeah, I completely agree, which is such a shame because Alex Diab is incredibly talented, and I'd love to see him back on a major team. But I agree with you that maybe there's not room just based on the way the team is shaping up.
So you teased it earlier. Who do you think is going to make the Olympic team after 2 days of nationals?
So I have a couple sets of data here. So after the day one results, the highest scoring team was Brody, Fred, Coy, Paul, and Steven with a 259.05. But right Behind them were Brody, Fred, Yule, Coy, and Steven with a 59.0. And then in third, Brody, Fred, Yule, Shane, and Steven with a 258.9. Then after day 2, using best scores, Brody, Fred, Coy, Yule, and Steven for a 263.65. And second, Brody, Fred, Coy, Paul, and Yule for a 263.3. And third, Brody, Fred, Coy, Paul, and Steven for a 263.15. And in fourth, Brody, Fred, Coy, Donnell, and Steven for a 263.3. So you're hearing the same names over and over and over again. Like, we're getting a pretty good picture of who's going to be on that Olympic team. And then I'll just go over who using averages. The top scoring team was Brody, Fred, Coy, Yule, and Steven for a 260.425. Now, while I think these teams are pretty strong, I would say that these teams, there's an issue. They're lacking that 5-6 vault. And last year at the World Championships, the first time in I can't say how many years, they had 3 5-6 vaults. They won their medal. Vault is the event that usually gets dinged the least at the World Championships. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, we only have Coy who's doing a 5-6 vault here. In many of these instances, some of the ones with Donnell, you have a 5-6, a 6-0, and then a 5-2, which would give you a 5-6 average, which would be okay. And then, of course, you have Paul Judah, who's the outlier, whose 5-2 vault is so incredibly clean that it basically scores as well as a 5-6 vault. But I'm a little bit concerned that in that fifth spot that we may end up with someone who doesn't do vault. What do you think? Like, would you take a specialist and have more 5-2 vaults?
Oh man, that's a really tough question. Didn't they say something in the qualification rules that a team with a specialist needs to be at least half a point higher than the next closest team?
Adding half a point only matters if they have an event and qualifications that only has 3 athletes able to compete on it. So that would be if you had a team of like Brody, Fred, Coy, Curran, and Steven. So that leaves still rings completely uncovered, and you only have the 3 athletes able to compete still rings and qualifications. That team has to be half a point higher than the next highest scoring team. But if you have a team of Brody, Fred, Coy, Paul, and Steven, the half a point thing doesn't matter because you have 4 athletes covering all of the events. So overall in the running, I would say Brody, Fred, Yule, Coy, Paul, Steven, Donnell, and Curran are really who's shaping up to be in the running for that Olympic team. I don't think Asher is totally out of it, but he is going to need some pretty stellar days at the Olympic trials, I think, to sort of break into that group. If I were Coy Young, I would be adding in as second vault for the Olympic trials, because while Brody is most likely to win Olympic trials based on what we saw here, Coy is still in that. And to be auto-selected for the Olympic team, you have to be top 3 on 3 events. So he was third on P-bars. He can easily be top 3 on pommel horse. And then vault, you have to have the 2 vault average that was confirmed with Brett McClure at Winter Cup earlier this year. If I were him, I would be adding in that second vault, no questions asked. If I was Asher, I would be doing 2 vaults. I would be like, hey, everyone, like nationals was a total fluke. I just wasn't feeling my best. I'm going to show up to Olympic trials. I'm going to win Olympic trials, because that's all that matters, is you have to win Olympic trials and be top 3 on 3 events. And I would be like, hey, I'm top 3 on still rings. I'm going to show up with a master floor set, and I'm going to be top 3 on vault. That's what I would do if I were them, because you want to give yourself the best shot at securing that automatic spot as possible.
I agree. I don't think anyone's out yet. I do think that there are some strategic moves the athletes can make to make themselves better candidates.
So as we wrap up our Olympic preview, I do want to take a moment and honor the junior athletes who competed this past week. And I know you were able to talk to a couple of them. who won the junior championships, both the 15 and 17 division, and then what did they have to say after?
So in the 16-year-old division, Salto's Maxine Khan won by almost 8 points. And Dante Reeve won the 17-year-old division by almost 3 points too. I was able to talk to Dante after the competition, and this is what he had to say.
I couldn't have done much better than I did. I'm really proud of High Bar, and actually, even though it wasn't my best event, I'm pretty proud of Pommel too. Just getting through it, getting past it.
Now, those of you might have heard a similarity in his last name. Dante is actually the son of Army coach J.D. Reeve. So his son walked away with the title. So I also talked to him, and here's what he had to say about Dante.
Now that I can be done with the coach hat, I'm incredibly proud of him. He did fantastic. I mean, both days came in, had a job to do, and was just straight focused all the way through, all 12 sets. He's just now kind of coming into his own as an athlete and understanding why we do what we do and getting those kind of results.
So again, really sweet father-son moment that they were able to share this experience together.
Thank you so much, Gabe, for your coverage this past weekend. Thank you to each of you who have been listening and supporting us. If you would, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast. It helps others find neutral deductions and learn more about men's gymnastics. We recently got another 5-star review, and they said, "What an excellent and concise podcast highlighting men's gymnastics. So helpful during the Olympic cycle. Always looking forward to a new episode." If you would like to help bring more live men's gymnastics coverage, please consider donating. A massive thank you to Megan, Masayoshi, Catherine, Nicole, Michael, Deidre, Patrick M., and Karen, who donated in the last week. We are entirely listener supported, and at this point, even $10 helps us cover a meal. A member of our team is headed to the Canadian Olympic trials coming up, and anything that you can donate helps so much. The PayPal link is in every show note and at the bottom of every article on neutraldeductions.com, and you can donate via PayPal or Stripe. If you have any questions, comments, or insider tips, you can email us at neutraldeductions@gmail.com. That's all for this week. We'll see you next time.